whole story and the whole plan. This is a redemptive plan that he had right from the start. And so we run big schools in Wyoming, a year-long school and a 3-month school. And usually for the content that we're about to do, we would spend sometimes just for Genesis a whole week. And in another of our schools, we would do what we're doing today in a whole week. So for me to kind of make this concise for you to understand is a mammoth task. I hope I do it well. It's a trial run. We haven't done this before. But first, let me do a Bible introduction for you guys, if you haven't heard some basic facts about the Bible. Cool. So the Bible is 66 books, 66 separate books that are put into one, written by 40 authors on 3 continents, 3 different languages: Aramaic, Hebrew, and Greek. Over 1,500 years. And the amazing thing about this is that if you were to listen to Mozart or Beethoven, you hear a whole song from start to finish. This is different people who didn't know each other from hundreds of years apart, but somehow they said the same story. God has the same character, they have the same culture all the way through, and it's an incredible thing that the Bible is one very interconnected book. So these are this is the Old Testament and the New Testament, and this is kind of how the Bible canon is decided. There's a lot of process that goes into it, and I won't go into that today because I don't have time. But this is how the prophecies are kind of stated or said, and they are then fulfilled in the New Testament, and that gives us this connecting story. It's very important to know the Old Testament to understand the New. There is 63,000 cross-references and over 300 messianic prophecies. So seeing them fulfilled shows us that this book is beautiful. It's the story of God. It's a story where he fulfills his promises. He doesn't just leave people hanging. So you might be wondering why. If you think of 3 most famous people in history, who would you say? Other than Napoleon. That's actually what I had on my mind, so thank you. Hitler, yeah. Alexander the Great, maybe. Julius Caesar. So this is one of probably the 4 of the most famous people throughout the last 2,000 years. This man had 12 manuscripts that he wrote himself, about 60 or 70 written about him, 200 years from the time that these events occurred. The Bible, on the other hand, has about 30,000 manuscripts, that is pieces of papyrus or copper or tubes with stone etchings on them. This gives the Bible a huge amount of accuracy, and we can really trust in the translations. We have different languages. So if you have questions about that, you can ask me afterwards. Because I could talk about that for an hour probably. And everything I'm going to be going through will be like, I could talk about this for an hour. I'm just having to subdue all my emotions. So, the Bible, because I love it, and it's like, I can't talk about it, but that's the overview series, so hopefully we're going to understand the whole story. So, the Bible's 2,000, the bit we're talking about is actually 4,000 years ago, 2,000 miles away. That's important because we cannot just read it and not understand the historical background. So we're going to also be explaining, when we get into our small groups, we're going to be explaining how the historical background impacts how we interpret what the Bible is trying to say to us. They had a different language, they had a different culture, and they're in completely different, they're in nice, hot sun countries, a lot of desert. Yeah, these things can impact how you're reading the book. If you don't bridge this gap, we will end up misinterpreting the Bible, which we don't want to do. Okay, is my speed good? Cool. So this is the overarching story of the Bible in general, and we're going to be just addressing this bit, actually. So this is a really nice kind of, oh, I need to send this. Can you send this in the group chat? So that you guys can have it on your own phones. And yeah, you can already start, you can sort of read along in your manuals, because we're going to go through some different some different stories, and your manual also helps you to see and follow along. So let's go into Genesis. One thing that we will be following today in this next hour is foreshadowings. So, does anyone know what a foreshadowing is?
It's like hinting at what is to come.
Yeah. So in this case, the kind of climax of the Bible is Jesus' death and resurrection. But we are going to hopefully show you that you can see Jesus, you can see his plan all throughout the Old Testament, through prophecies, through even events that kind of mimic what happens with Jesus. And we're going to explore these together. So, we'll go through the creation, how God forms the earth, the fall, and how how Adam and Eve rebelled from God, and we'll also go through the characters, and I'm going to jump into certain areas and make that a little bit more clear for you guys, whereas I can't go into every single story. So actually, with creation stories, the important thing to know is that there is actually 12 major creation stories in Babylonian, Canaanite, Egyptian, and they all have their own versions of the creation story. Genesis gives us a very, very unique version of this creation story. It's the only among, and there's also many variations of these 12 major ones, but it's the only creation story where God created not out of chaos. He's very intentional. He creates by his word. So for example, in a Canaanite theology, in Egyptian theology, all the gods are fighting, and they kill each other, and the dead body creates the earth, and something else creates the sky, and there's a war, and then humans are enslaved to the gods, and then they pray to the gods. So it's very different to us. So he creates by his word, not by war. Men and women are co-ruling equally. God says to them, be fruitful and multiply. This is to Adam and Eve. Replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, and every living thing that moves on earth. So, it's a very intentional story, and we are made in the image of God. It's the only story that has that. You might be familiar with the 7 days of creation. We have quite a nice. This is also shows the intentionality of God. Light, sea and sky, land and plants. He starts 3 days forming the earth, and then he fills the earth. So sun, moon and stars also corresponding to light, fish and birds corresponding to sea, sky, and then animals and us corresponding to land and plants. And on the last day, he takes his rest and enjoys the work of his labour, which we are still enjoying now. And I hope you guys also take Sabbath, because it's very restful. And the world's so crazy. We need that rest day. We need to also rest and focus on God and think about what he's done, what he's created. So he creates Adam and Eve, and there's 2 trees in the garden: tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the tree of eternal life. Firstly, Adam and Eve are told to not eat from this tree in the middle of the garden, and the serpent, as some of you may know, deceives them into gaining this knowledge. He says, did God really tell you not to eat of the fruit? So they stumble into sin, and they bring sin into the world, and they disobey God. They introduce sin and suffering and death into the world, and God kicks them out of the garden before they get to the tree of eternal life. So stopping them from being in this cycle of destruction is actually an act of mercy that God moved them away from that area. So, and some of you, who knows the story of Cain and Abel? Yeah? Yeah, I'm not sure, you never know with the crowd, there's a lot of familiar faces and some new faces, but it's a sad story. Cain kills Abel, his brother, and luckily Adam and Eve have another son called Seth, right? Good. Called Seth, and Seth then can carry on the bloodline all the way to Jesus. And we're going to find some more characters, such as Abraham, who start to build this nation which are God's people, and which Jesus himself will come from. When Adam and Eve, this is called the proto-evangelion, that's kind of a weird word, but what this is the first time in the Old Testament, already in the 3rd chapter, where we see God pronouncing a curse to the snake, but he also makes a promise to the readers, which is us, that he has a plan. Would anyone like to read the verse on the screen?
And I will cause hostility between you and the women, and between your offspring and her offspring. You will strike your head, and you will strike his heel.
So, the meaning of this, he will crush your head or he'll strike your head, different translations, is Jesus has there is a figure who they would not have known yet, the original audience, who will have final victory over this figure of the serpent who represents this deceiver, or the Satan, and you will strike his heel. Also, this kind of temporary suffering that Jesus has to go through, but it's actually a very small amount of suffering for the freedom that he's brought us into. So as Adam and Eve are kind of exiled from the garden, it seems they're kind of leaving the garden through the east, and it's quite important that the east is actually the direction where people are separated from God. So later on, when Israel go into exile, they will be going to the east. The door of the temple is facing east, and the door of the tabernacle is also facing east. And coming back into his presence is going west. The reason I say this is because even though they've been exiled, God has a plan to dwell with his people and to be with his people, and we see him so desperately longing to walk with them, even though they have now fallen from this communion that they had with him. In the wilderness, in the tabernacle, which Willem's going to go into more next week, and in the temple, and also this fire, this spirit that we see in the New Testament is a kind of new temple that we will be exploring later on in the series. Yeah. So this is it's really good to understand the general geography of what's happening at the time. Yeah. So this is the Middle East. Well, I'm going to try and translate some of these words for you. This would have been in 2000 BC. And these aren't random dates that we're throwing out. I'm also going to go a little bit into archaeology and how we can confirm these dates. But basically, this is Saudi Arabia. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going off memory. This is Egypt. It says Egypt. This later on in the New Testament is going to be called Asia Minor, but it's actually Turkey nowadays. And then this Assyria actually becomes Syria. But the important, the promised land that we hear of in the Bible is this kind of space here. And it's important because it's fertile land and it's surrounded by lots of desert and and so when we now we can read the Bible and read places like Beersheba and Damascus and actually kind of picture where we're going, what the scene is happening. So Abraham is going to migrate from from Persia, from Mesopotamia in Ur, all the way up here. Yeah. So after the fall, human sin continues to spread, and the increasing wickedness before the flood and the Tower of Babel. So people try to build a tower that is coming to be bigger than God, more important than God. And Noah gains favor in the sight of the Lord. So you're probably very familiar with the story. Even you can ask someone on the street and they'll know the story. He makes a boat, he preserves his family, and it's a very sad story because humanity is wiped out and it's almost like a restart. But in this, he makes a covenant with a bow through the sky with Noah, saying, "I will never again flood the earth or judge the earth in this way." And then we have Abraham, who's quite a few generations later, and he's the first one to receive the promise of a chosen people. This happens 3 times. He says, "I will bless those who bless you." This is in Genesis 12:3 if you want to read along. "I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families on earth will be blessed through you." So he has a blessing of protection, those that hurt them, and if you do well, he will also bless his family. But there's this also little promise in there, which seems to be going quite far into the future. All the families of the earth will be blessed. That's quite a big statement. Abraham has a son called Isaac. And as we will do a little Bible study later, we're going to also find that this is a foreshadowing of Jesus. What Isaac does, he actually takes the wood for the sacrifice. So Abraham gets asked to sacrifice his own son, and it actually took him a very long time to have this son because his wife was barren until she was 80, and it was almost impossible that they would bear a child. So they bear the child, and Isaac, as you can see, is chilling, but he doesn't actually know that he's going to die. So he's carrying his wood. He says to his father, "Do you need me to carry the wood up the place where he's going to be sacrificed?" And at the last moment, when Abraham's about to kill Isaac, an angel appears, and there is a ram, a substitutionary sacrifice. And this all sounds very weird to us, but you have to remember this is a long time ago, it's ancient. It's actually very normal to sacrifice your children. This might sound crazy, but it is very normal to sacrifice your children in the surrounding countries. Actually, they thought that they would get blessing from God, the Canaanites, if they would give their children to the fire, which is this would never happen in this day and age. This is very primitive, it's a very long time ago. And God's actually saying, I'm not like the other gods. I don't want death. I want to provide a sacrifice for, and this also foreshadows the Messianic King in Jesus, that he will take our place, and he will carry his own cross, his own wood up the mountain. Isaac falls in love as he grows up with a lady called Rebecca, and Rebecca, she she has a child. They get married in Egypt actually, and he's called Jacob. She actually has twins. Sorry, there's Esau and Jacob. And Jacob is holding his ankle as he comes out. He's actually not the firstborn son, but he takes his blessing. And and he becomes sort of the bearer of the name Israel. He fights with God, and Israel actually means one who fights with God, or one who wrestles with God. He has 12 sons through 4 different wives, and if you want to read that story, it's crazy. What am I doing for time actually? Good. Okay. So he has Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah through one woman. Then he has Dan and Naphtali through the servant of the first lady, Leah. And then he has Gad and Asher through the servant of the second lady. And then it's complicated. I could go on, but read this story, and it's actually, there's a lot of striving going on, and there's a lot of broken family, there's family issues in there. But we see God working through the brokenness of these decisions of the father of the daughter that he was giving to Jacob. And so there's some quite important names in here which you'll remember maybe through the story of Joseph. So Joseph is betrayed into the hands of the Ishmaelites. And Reuben is the oldest. Levi later on becomes the bearer of the priesthood. So this is the bloodline of all the priests. The bloodline of some of the priests. So some of these would be chosen. Judah, later on in the story of Moses, does a very beautiful thing to his little brother Benjamin and takes his place as a sacrifice, and he actually gains this. He gains this almost this blessing where the Messiah himself will come from the line of Judah. We have Joseph, who ends up with 2 sons, and they become the leaders of that area of Israel. And I think that's it for now. The others are less important. You will still see them, but there are some important ones now. Which brings us to the story of Joseph. The rest of Genesis follows Abraham's son and his grandson and his great-grandson Joseph. This is chapters 26 to the end. Through their stories, we see how God works through flawed people to fulfill his promises. Joseph, his journey through into Egypt, sets the stage for the events of the next book, which is Exodus. So a very interesting thing about Jesus and Joseph is that both of them were rejected by their own brothers. So Joseph, they're really jealous of him because his father loves him the most. I think one of the main reasons he loves him so much is because he's madly in love with his mum, and he really wanted to marry Rachel first, but he kept getting deceived before he managed to get there. So he has Joseph, and all his brothers are conspiring to kill him, and they're mad. And there's this whole story of how Joseph redeems his own family. They basically fake his death. His father believes he's dead, he basically ends up saving the whole of Egypt from a 7-year famine. So he saves, was it 5? Sorry.
No, 7.
7, yeah. So he saves food for 7 years, and then that actually really saves the people from dying of hunger for 7 years. Even though his brothers didn't believe that either one, they would not bow down to him, he wouldn't be a ruler in Egypt, but he does become a ruler in Egypt. And 2, they didn't think that they would be begging for food of him later on when they thought he was dead, or they'd sold him into slavery. So both of them were tempted, both were stripped of their robes. They forgave those who wronged them. So Joseph forgave all of his brothers despite what they did. He did give them a bit of a hard time before he kind of extended. I just read it recently, and I was like, it was really annoying them a lot, as much as to try and get them back, but he's quite gracious. And they saved not only their own people, but also the Gentiles, the foreigners. And they were taken into Egypt and sold for the price of a slave. So another little example of a foreshadowing. So Exodus. Cool. In the series, we're going to be also giving you one piece of archaeology per day or per night. And the reason we do this is because it's fun. And actually, when I was in history class when I was younger, I always thought, like, this is so boring, like no one cares. It was like my least favorite. It was my least favorite kind of class in school. And now, like, I'm all about it because it's like proving that the Bible is true and stuff. So the cool thing about these tablets, they're called the Mari tablets, and there's 25,000 of them found in the area of Assyria and Canaan, and around the Middle East. And they're written in cuneiform, which is a very well-known type of writing in that time. And they contained names that were very similar to the Bible. They contain cultural kind of explanations, so things such as household gods, marriage rituals and divorce rituals, very similar to Hebrew customs. And there was even a mention of the Habidu, which they believed to be the Hebrews. So just thought I'd leave that with you guys because it's interesting. As we go through the weeks, these will get more and more accurate because this is a long time ago. This is 4,000 years ago. And then when we go to Villains Week or Sanders Week in the next few, they'll become even more kind of interesting. But I think that's interesting. Cool. Next. So, Israel is actually Pharaoh dies in Egypt, and he forgets that he had this he grew up with Joseph, but he forgets this friendship, not grew up, sorry. He brought Joseph into this place of power, and he forgets, the new Pharaoh forgets that Joseph had this favor. So that was a mouthful. And the Hebrews are sort of made slaves. They're also breeding very fast, and the Pharaoh gets really afraid that they're going to take over. There's too many of them, and they're going to become powerful and kind of bring their own religion into this. So God calls Moses to save, and we're going to go into this later, so don't be afraid. God calls Moses to free the Hebrew people from slavery in Egypt. And God will, in a very personal way, confront Pharaoh. So then they have these 10 plagues, which you might have heard of in church or Sunday school. And the last plague is the Passover, and we'll go into what that is as well. And as they escape, they go through the sea, and the sea opens up or dries up, and they escape from Pharaoh being chased by the whole army, which is just crazy to think that really happened. So, Moses has a brother called Aaron, who's also from the tribe of Levi. That means that he can be a priest. And Aaron will become the first high priest. And Villains next week is going to explain a little bit more of what a high priest's duty was. Hopefully we can clear up a little bit of, I remember being very confused about the priesthood and all the sacrifices and the dead animals and why did they do that? It's so weird and strange. But when you start to understand kind of the meaning behind it, or even the foreshadowing behind it, it starts to really have beauty. And so I think back and think, how did I find that something so weird to me became really beautiful in retrospect? So Aaron and Moses are kind of leading the people. And sorry, shall I go back? Yeah, and then in the following weeks we'll go through the time of Joshua, the time of the Judges. Moses' life is quite easily split into 3 sections of 40. So, Exodus chapters 1 to 4 already go past 80 years of his life, and most of the stuff that's happening, so try and wrap your minds around this, because most of the crazy things that he does, he's 80 years old already. So he's like super old. So if you feel like you're not doing much in your life at the age of 20 or 30, you're like, what did I do with my life? Just think about maybe you can do it 50 years when you're 80, and like lead people through fire and through a double-walled sea and do all these crazy signs. So that's why there's so much going on here. It's like, yeah. So he's 40 years in Egypt. You know, he washes up in a basket. And he gets brought up by the family of Pharaoh, and he gains a lot of power there. He gets really mad about how an Egyptian is treating one of his own people, and he actually kills him. He kills him, and he gets very afraid because Pharaoh wants to kill him. So he runs all the way to Midian, and Midian is just kind of this village in the middle of nowhere, where he falls in love with a Midianite lady called Zipporah. Cool name for a kid. And from the age of 40 to 80, he just herds sheep, and that's it. So don't worry if you haven't achieved much. Oh, to be fair, he's already been the second in command in Egypt. So I'm a bit contradicting myself, but he does all the crazy things that you know from Sunday school or from, I don't know how long you've been a Christian for, but that's when he's 80 years old. So he marries Deborah, and he has this encounter with God where God shows himself through a burning bush where he takes his shoes off. This is holy ground, and actually it's very interesting what he says. Here's 3 quotes from Moses after God calls him to deliver the Hebrew people from slavery. Exodus 4:1. But behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice. And then verse 10. Oh my Lord, I'm not eloquent, I'm slow of speech and of tongue. This I felt like an hour ago. And oh my Lord, please send someone else in verse 13. He's like desperate for someone else to do this crazy task, because Pharaoh is probably one of the most powerful people, not just in Egypt, but in the whole of that map that we showed you earlier. So he's scared, and he might have a speech impediment or a lisp, or I don't know what he had, but he didn't think people would listen to him, but lo and behold, they do listen to him. And God introduces himself to Moses. He says, I am who I am. And interestingly, God's name is written Yahweh, like it's with a Yod, a Hey, a Vav, and a Hey in the Hebrew alphabet. The interesting thing about these symbols is that Yod means hand, and Hey means behold, and Vav means peg or nail, and Hey means behold. So if you put that into a sentence, it's hand, behold, nail, behold, which is, I'll leave it there, I'm not going to interpret it. I'm not going to interpret that because we're not supposed to do that. But I just think that's interesting that that's in the name of Yahweh. You can fact check me. So, Moses stares down the most powerful king on earth, turns his staff into a snake, he calls down plagues from heaven, he parts the Red Sea, and leads an entire nation into the wilderness. That's potentially 300,000 people into a desert with no food. So I don't know if you would do that, but he did that. Oh yeah, there's a cool quote that I like. Moses spent 40 years thinking he was a somebody, 40 years learning he was a nobody, and 40 years discovering what God can do with nobody. So don't think too little of yourself. A lot of the patriarchs, or the main figures in the Bible, and matriarchs I should say, they were imperfect people who made mistakes. So as Moses is leading them, hello. Let me just get him a manual. So Moses pronounces these plagues down. He's asked by God to lead them out, and God says, I'll give you a way to lead them out of Israel through these plagues, which is very crazy. But Pharaoh is so stubborn that even when flies and frogs and the whole of the Nile has turned to blood, he still won't let the people go. He's desperate to keep these slaves, because these slaves are making him money, they're building him buildings, they're part of his infrastructure. He's very stubborn. But the one very interesting thing, I'm going to take 4 examples from this, is that these plagues are very intentionally poised towards the gods of Egypt. So in Egypt they had many gods at the time, and each plague actually corresponds to a god, and it almost says that God, the God of the Hebrews, the God of Israel, is more powerful than these gods. So the first one is blood. In chapter 7, the whole of the Nile, along with all of the water in Egypt, turns into blood, but Pharaoh doesn't let the Israelites go. Happy is the god of the Nile, so it was a direct attack on this god or goddess. Another example is Hathor, which is a god that is depicted in Egyptian archaeology as a cow, or that's how they would have distinguished which god it is. And in chapter 9, all of the livestock die, and this is again like God saying, your God, or non-existent God, is actually powerless, and you need to let my people go, because people are not supposed to be in slavery. They're not supposed to be enslaved. And then a really big one is the 9th plague, which is the plague of darkness, where the whole world goes dark. And Ra is the god of the sun, one of the biggest Egyptian gods. And and if you've made the sun go dark in the middle of the day, that's also quite a direct attack on this. So all of this is to say that I was blanked. All of this is to say that God He has a longing heart to set His people free, but He also wants to show that He is sovereign and that He has power. He is powerful, and we have a God. It's the same God that we serve now. We have a God who is more powerful than all of the things that the world is throwing at you. He's more powerful than your anxiety. He's more powerful than depression. He's more powerful than war. He's more powerful than leaders in the world. He can do anything, and this is the God that we believe in now. The last plague is quite a sad one, where the firstborn son, Pharaoh also had his own son, is taken away from the people. But he says to his own people, if you put the blood of a lamb on the doorframe of your houses, I will spare all of those children. They won't die. And this later becomes a festival called Passover, which is remembering that God, the angel of God, will pass over when we trust in the blood of Christ. So, but actually, for the ancient Israelites, look at Sandra and I'm like, for the ancient Israelites, it was actually them remembering that they had been saved from captivity, that the Exodus happened, so they would let they were let free, and their firstborn sons were not killed. Any questions? So I know that this is a lot of information. It's in your manual, so hopefully you can also kind of chew on it a little bit later on. We also have a group chat that you can join, so if you have questions, you can kind of find our numbers and ask us directly. Or can they message in the group chat? No. Okay. Yeah. So they go into the wilderness and they end up at this mountain called Mount Sinai. Who's heard of Mount Sinai? Has anyone been to Mount Sinai? Whoa, okay, Chris. That's so cool. I thought there might be one. I just had a feeling. God's presence comes in a cloud and fire onto Mount Sinai, which is crazy. No one could go near it because it was His holy presence. It was before the tabernacle was made. And in this place, Moses goes up and he writes down the 10 Commandments, and he receives this law that would become this, like we have law in the Netherlands and in England where I'm from. And law is what it makes a constitution. It gives a people their identity. You need law, even though it sounds maybe oppressive. The Bible has 613 laws, and funnily, in contrast, the Netherlands has about 25,000 laws. So if you think, oh my gosh, like this is really impressive and intense for their people, it was actually, if you put it in perspective, it's actually not that crazy. This was to give them an identity. But also, God introduces Himself, His character to Moses. I barely read any of my notes, that's so funny. So, whilst He's making the covenant with God, the event of the golden calf happens. So, the people of God are worshipping an image that they thought would be Yahweh. But one of the commands is not to worship idols or things that are not God or things that, yeah. And this was tragic because Moses came down the mountain after 40 days of fasting, so he hadn't eaten for 40 days. And he's so mad that he throws the tablets on the floor and breaks the tablets. And the crazy thing is that God asks him to fast another 40 days, go back up the mountain, and then write them again. And the guy must have been going through like severe hunger and kind of grouchiness and just being annoyed at everyone because he had to do it twice. But in this place, God renews His covenant with them. He says in Exodus 34, the Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty. So He's a God of justice, He's a God of grace and of love. And this is the Old Testament God. So, this is where I'm going to end, in case you're falling asleep. And this is the tabernacle. So in Exodus, they get the blueprint. So is anyone an architect here? No. They get the blueprint for the tabernacle, and it's very specific. And you might read through it and think this is mind-numbingly boring. Like the basin needs to be gold, and there should be pomegranates on the door, and you need to etch different colours and angels into the curtains, but everything has a very extreme significance. And the beauty of the tabernacle is that it's also foreshadows the new covenant that we as believers live in now. That's the covenant of grace, where we are forgiven of our sins. So the bronze altar would be where they sacrifice animals. So it's where something takes your place of your sin. And the wash basin is where you're washed clean from your sin. Purification and cleansing. the holy place is a place of worship and prayer inside the tent. Ongoing fellowship with God. And God is so holy. In the Holy of Holies, which is the room right at the end, God would have a curtain to separate, and only the high priest can go into that room. And the interesting thing is we now have a high priest who goes into the holy place for us and welcomes us into the holy place, so we can now be in God's presence now. We can dwell with him. And I must say, I often neglect to be with God when I know that God has freedom for me, he has love for me and healing. But I'll even be in a worship event or at church with my hands up, but I actually keep God at an arm's length. I think I love God, but I'm too scared to let him fully into my life and to completely transform me. And I'm learning to let him to be in that holy place and let him change me, but it can be painful at times. So I know it's scary, but I just wanted to highlight that we shouldn't be afraid. And as we dig into his presence, we really can experience healing and freedom, because that's what he wants. And actually, every single item inside the tabernacle and later the temple will represent a different truth about God. But I won't go into it now because it's complicated. So it's the first time since Adam and Eve in the garden that God dwelt visibly with his people in the tabernacle. There would be a big cloud of fire at night time and a big pillar of smoke by day. The cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of God filled the tabernacle. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled upon it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. So I don't see any of this as a plan B from God. I made Adam and Eve, they messed up, I don't know what to do, oh, let's kick them out. It's like he had a plan all the way from the beginning. It's plan A, it's not plan B. To have a people of his own that would have the free will to be in his presence. They would get to choose if they wanted to be in his presence. And the freedom to choose whether they wanted to fulfill his law or not, and see the consequences of that. And that's what I just wanted to end with. He comes back to be in the tabernacle, in the presence of his own people, and next week we'll go into Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, which I'm excited about. But now I'm going to invite Sam up. Thanks for listening.